Good morning, Garland Nixon here. It is Wednesday morning, and I have with me political publicist Harpal Brar. Oh, messed his name up already. Harpal Brar. And we're going to talk about India. We're going to talk about Russia, and we're going to have an interesting morning. Let's talk. Good morning, Garland Nixon here with Harpal Brar, and we've got a lot to talk about, and we've got a lot to learn today from a very wise man who has a tremendous amount of experience in international politics. Good morning, Harpal, and welcome to my humble YouTube channel.
Good morning, Garland. I'm humbled to be interviewed by such an eminent person as you.
Thank you. So let's talk. I did want to start by, letting you know, I interviewed your daughter and on this channel, and a tremendous amount of positive feedback. My viewers were happy. I got emails, so I really certainly had a wonderful time. Learned a lot from her. Let's start with this. Something that I wanted to, I'm a person that I love to learn. That's if I had to sum up Garland Nixon in one phrase, love to learn. Something that I don't know much about, I'd like for you to discuss, and that is post 1991. The Soviet Union dissolves. There's American mythology as to how that happened with Ronald Reagan. I see it totally different, but at any rate, there was a communist party in Russia. Post 1991, there still exists a communist party in Russia, but in the West, we talk as though it doesn't exist. It's, that which must not be mentioned, that there is still a very powerful anti-imperialist socialist communist party in Russia. If you could talk about post 1991, that party, what it went through, and where it is now, as far as how much political power it has, etc. I'm all ears.
Well, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, which was against the wishes of the former constituents party.
Uh-oh. Harpal froze on me. Are you there, Harpal?
Yes, I am.
Okay, try again. Yeah, you froze for a second. I'm sorry. You only got about 2 words out, but try again.
Yeah. Well, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, it was against the wishes of the peoples of the constituent republics of the Soviet Union, who by an overwhelming majority in a referendum voted to carry on with the Soviet Union. Anyhow, it was dissolved by capitalist voters, and Yeltsin was in the driving seat of that. And when they came to power, they banned the Communist Party. But through struggle, they were able to re-register themselves as a party in 1993. And that party is the second largest political organization in Russia after Putin's own party. It's got over 50 members in the Russian Duma. It's got several governors of various provinces and got representation everywhere. So it's a very important party. And at one stage, Zyuganov fought the presidential election against Yeltsin, and he had actually won. He was cheated by money that was brought by the United States of America and various thieves in the aftermath of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, who grabbed hold of lots of assets for very cheap prices. And they even supported Yeltsin in return for being allowed to have a lot of loot from what had been built in the Soviet Union for over 7 decades. So it's a very important party. It's an anti-imperialist party. If you look at its stance on the war in Ukraine, it is very much in favor of that war, because it says it's a war waged by NATO imperialism as a proxy war, using the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder with a view to disintegrating Russia and breaking it up into small, easily digestible parts so it could be looted even more than it was during the time of Yeltsin. And Putin, having come to power, has put Russia on its feet, and that's the reason he's hated. He is not autocrat as he's portrayed to be. He is somebody who looks after the interests of the Russians rather than letting Russia be looted by imperialism, principally by Anglo-American imperialism. So Communist Party is playing a very important role. It's not an insignificant party. There are other communist parties as well who have differences with the party of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. But this is the largest party. This is the party that has influence everywhere. And its stance in supporting the special military operation launched by Russia against Ukraine is playing a very important part in the developments in Russia as well as in Ukraine.
What about in the eastern Ukraine? I have seen that there are socialist movements, communist party, etc., in eastern Ukraine, and I would imagine that would be one of the reasons that the fascists in western Ukraine hate them. But what about and what was formerly eastern Ukraine, but what is now Western Russia, maybe?
Eastern Ukraine is basically the area around Donbass, the Donetsk People's Republic, the Lugansk People's Republic, and all the way, if you like, up to Odessa. And it's the most industrialized region. It was built in the Soviet Union. I'm sure you know there was a movement called the Stakhanovite movement. Stakhanov was a Ukrainian coal miner who
We've lost you for a moment, so hopefully you'll be right back. You're freezing up occasionally. Harpal has frozen for now. We'll hope
sorry.
Okay, there we go. You said the Ukrainian coal miner who
came up with very novel methods of mining coal, and he was producing so much coal that it started an emulation drive. Every miner was asked to learn from Stakhanov. Soviet Union had these emulation drives in various areas, and Donbass was industrially built by the Soviet Union during Soviet times. It's the most industrialized area. It gets most of the income of Ukraine. And Ukrainians did not want to separate from Ukraine, the people in the Donbass area, nor did Russia want them to be separate. All they wanted was that the Russian language must be recognized, that the people living in these areas should be given a certain amount of autonomy, and that Ukraine not join NATO. This was even after the Maidan, what they call revolution, basically a coup staged by United States of America through the Ukrainian proxies, and people like Victoria Nuland being in the front line of that coup and getting rid of a legally elected government headed by Viktor Yanukovych and forcing him to flee the country. Even then, Putin did not want a solution of these areas outside of Ukraine. They did their best to do that. And for 8 years, the Ukrainian army has been shelling the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, and they've killed 14,000 people. And there's not a mention of that in the Western press. It's only through the social media and people like yourselves that people learn the truth. Because we live in an era where actually even just speaking plain truth marks you out as a revolutionary, to be hated and to be repressed by imperialist forces, principally Anglo-American imperialism and their vassals in Western Europe, who were occupied in the aftermath of the Second World War, where America maintains its bases, Germany, etc., etc. They all follow what Uncle Sam has to say. They don't have a word of independence to say in their own favor. And their economies are being destroyed by following United States of America. And that's the position.
In Russia, the Communist Party being the second largest party, President Putin's been in for a while. 20 some odd years he's been in power. How is his relationship? How is the party's relationship with President Putin? And has that, changed? Has that grown? Has that gotten better or worse over the course of his leadership?
Well, it's a contradictory relationship. On the one hand, they seek the support of the Communist Party, and on some issues, the Communist Party, especially when it comes to fighting against imperialism, is able to give support. But on the other hand, to the extent that they're fighting for socialism, then they are obviously not the darlings of Vladimir Putin. So that contradiction comes all the time. So it's if you like, an uneasy relationship. It's not an easy relationship to conduct.
And it seems to me, one of the things that I noticed after the special military operation began was that the Putin administration, the Russian government, decided they needed to, particularly in the form of their military industrial complex, needed to make that more state run. It seems to me that that Ukraine has kind of forced, I don't know if that's the right word, the Russian government to move more in the direction of state-run industries. And might I add, the sanctions war on Russia has kind of demonstrated to Russia the importance of having some state, or more, at least more state-run industries. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're absolutely correct. Because if Russia did not have those state-run industries, it would have run out of ammunition. It would have run out of armaments, just as the NATO countries are running out of armament. I mean, even somebody as fascistic as Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, said Ukraine is using armaments at a rate that we cannot produce them. We cannot replenish them. They've actually emptied their own stocks to supply Ukraine with the weaponry, and they can't produce the number of shells and number of armaments that Ukraine needs. Ukraine fires something like 6,000 shells every day, but Russia fires about 60,000. They can't compete up with Russia, although there are news that Russia is running out of armaments. This is just self-deception that Western journalists, who literally are not journalists, they are basically reading the statements of the defense and foreign ministries of the various imperialist countries. Russia is able to carry on this special military operation and defy all predictions of being able to bring it down. When Russia started its military operation, the imperialist countries were cock-a-hoop. We got Russia now. We supply sanctions on one hand, supply sophisticated weaponry to our proxies in Ukraine, and Putin would be overthrown within 6 months, and we'll be able to come to an arrangement with some compliant, if you like, comprador, bourgeois leader of Russia. It's turned out to be completely different. The Russian economy has proved its resilience, partly because of state ownership, but also as the Western companies are forced to leave Russia, locals take them over. Russian agriculture has become much better. They have actually gone for substitution. What they cannot import from the West, they are able to produce themselves. And what they are not yet able to produce, they get from countries like China and India. So the trade that Russia has is better than ever before. Last month, Russia sold more oil than any time before the start of the military operation. And that's notwithstanding the sanctions. And now the Western countries are actually importing Russian petroleum products, because what countries like India do is, import crude oil from Russia, they refine it and sell diesel and other kind of petroleum products to Europe. So European countries, notwithstanding sanctions, are getting Russian oil. Russia simply cannot be marked out of the occasion. It's too powerful a country. And the sanctions, in fact, have hit the countries that impose the sanctions more than they have hit Russia. I live in Britain, and there's a cost of living crisis. There is a cost of living crisis in Germany, in France, in every European country, and also in your country. Although your country is benefiting from this war more than any of its imperialist vassals. It is able to sell its liquefied natural gas at very high prices. It's not suffering anything from those sanctions. Other countries are. It's destroyed, blown up in a terrorist fashion, the Nord Stream gas pipelines. And who is the biggest sufferer of that? Europe, but principally Germany. German economy was built on the base of cheap Russian energy and its own engineering skills. And America, by knocking out the Nord Stream, while it wants to hurt Russia, it actually also wants to hurt Germany. Germany is a big imperialist competitor, and they wanted to knock it out. And the present day German leadership is dim, stupid, and not worthy of leading the great country. No German leader, other than Olaf Scholz, could have done what is taking place right now. I don't know what they've got on him. Maybe they've got some CIA reports on him, what he has been up to. But the fact of the matter is, it's hurting Germany. And Germans, their thousands, have been demonstrating in various cities, including Berlin, people, some of them holding and flying Russian flags. They don't want sanctions. And this movement is taking place in several countries, Czechoslovakia and France. It's not so strong in Britain, but all the less, there are a lot of rumblings around. People don't want to pay high gas prices in order to be able to wage proxy wars against Russia, with whom we have no quarrel. Why should we be fighting against Russia? Absolutely no reason. Why should your country be fighting against Russia? They should keep within their own boundaries. Fix the problems that America has. Fix the problems of terrible infrastructure. Fix the problems of poverty. People homeless, sleeping in the streets in the richest country in the world. Racial discrimination. And that is after the Civil War in America, which I disagree with people when they say it was fought over the question of freeing the slaves. It was fought over the question of keeping the Union. But of course, the Union could only be kept because the Confederates wanted to carry on with their old system by freeing the slaves. And at the end of that Civil War, the American administration, even headed by somebody progressive like Abraham Lincoln, thought of various plans to deport the black population to the Caribbean and various other places. It didn't work out. But not all the same, Civil War did free the black people from chattel slavery, although it didn't bring them the freedom they were promised. Under the Reconstruction, every black family was to get 40 acres of land and a mule. They didn't get that. And within 10 years of the Civil War, defeating the Confederates, laws were passed in various American states depriving the black people of their right to vote, right to send children to the same schools. And they had to wait until the civil rights movement of the 60s to achieve a modicum of equality. You know, complete equality cannot come. People who've been deprived for centuries of economic benefits of the American society cannot, even if you in law outlaw racial discrimination, you cannot bring them up to the same level as other people because of poverty. A lot has to be done. And they should be doing that rather than waging more wars and killing millions of people from Iraq to Afghanistan to Libya to Syria. And what's more, that American taxpayer is paying a lot. American armament industry and oil industry is making a lot of money. American people are suffering and they're paying for these wars. They don't directly benefit from that. And American people have a duty to put an end to it, saying they won't fight. I'm sure if there was conscription and the sons and daughters of the rich people and the middle class people were being taken into the army, they will rise up much more quickly. But the professional army, of course, is a different matter.
One of the things that I've been saying before this happened for some time, studying a lot on South America, traveling to South America, is that the U.S. was building an the U.S. was inadvertently building an anti-imperialist bloc in South America. There's a Eurasian-centered bloc that is building, led by Russia, China, India, I would argue, and of course, secondarily, probably Iran, South Africa, Brazil. You see where I'm going. Countries that were working to, I think, integrate themselves into the Western economic system are, I think, recognizing that neoliberal capitalism is dying on the vine, that it is, imploding. Your thoughts on this new, let's say, Eurasian-centered, we can call it a coalition, we can call it a bloc, we can call it a changing world order, and the nature of it, of the anti-imperialism within this new coalition / bloc, or whatever we're calling it?
Well, it is a bloc which has been brought together. I mean, you're quite right, by American imperialism at two levels. One, they go around and lecture everybody how they should run their affairs. World has changed. It's not 19th century, it's 21st century. And you cannot tell people what they should be doing. That's one thing, but that's only minor. The other thing is nobody is safe putting their reserves and currency in American assets, because they act not like the keepers of these funds in trust. They act like thieves. They steal them. Whether it's Libyan money, whether it's the money belonging to the Russian central bank, they simply grab them. And nobody is happy with their money being there. And they're slowly and surely finding different methods of training. America applies sanctions everywhere. The moment you disagree with America, the moment a country follows a slightly independent line, they slap sanctions of that country, which means that country cannot change. And how can they use the dollar if they cannot make the payment, if they cannot receive the payment? Quite rightly, people are saying, we will trade in our own currencies. An increasing number of countries, even India, on whom America had such hopes of being able to corral and bring it into its alliance as an anti-China force, it's not quite working like as they expected. They brought India into what's called the Quad, which is composed of India, United States, Australia, and Japan, basically as an anti-China force. But it's not working quite like that. I do not believe Indian people will be willing to send their soldiers to fight against China. Whatever the disputes with China, we can come to that in a moment, they will not be prepared. They've had the taste of a fight with China in 1962. They do not want to repeat the same mistakes. The mistake that was made by the government of Jawaharlal Nehru, that should never be repeated. It has hurt India badly, and any further conflict would hurt India badly. It's not going to hurt China as much. It'll hurt both countries, and it's not in the interest of India to have a fight with China. And China certainly does not want to have a fight. It does everything possible to have cordial relations with India.
That being said, that's one of the things that I've thought about, and that is the border conflicts, the conflicts between India and China, and we've seen the Middle East, Saudi and Iran. China was able to do a brilliant diplomatic job. Of course, Russia was involved behind the scenes, not so much in the open. But I've been watching for some kind of a resolution, some kind of a fix to China and Russia, China, India. I'm not even going to call it a conflict. Let's just say some disputes as a sign that things are really changing. Do you think there is the political, um, I don't know the word I want to say, clearance? Do you think it's the lead two things? Do you think the leaders of China and India want to resolve their disputes? Do you think there's the political cover for them to be able to do that? And so what, let's talk about that whole thing. China, India disputes, where do you see that going and why?
Well, first of all, the dispute is on the northern border, which is known as the McMahon Line. Now, McMahon Line is not simply a line drawn across, it's a huge area. And the Chinese have always maintained that this so-called McMahon Line was settled by British imperialism at a time when neither the Chinese nor the Indian people were in charge of their own affairs. They were both under the cosh of British colonialism and imperialism. And the Chinese have always wanted to sit down with maps and settle this matter. The problem with bourgeois countries, and India is one of them, is they have elections every 4 or 5 years. And there's always some lunatic from opposition party or something who says, you're selling our country to China. You have the same in your country. It's a perpetual election cycle. Electioneering never stops. The moment one election is over, first there are disputes whether that election was fair or not, whether the Russians manipulated the election. They're carrying on in a way like America controls Russia controls America, that American elections cannot be actually conducted because Russia interfered with them. So once Trump was elected, the Democrats could not explain why they lost the election. You know why they lost the election. They are warmongers. They are not. They may be called left because these terms have lost all their meaning. There's no connection between thought and content. There's no connection between what is said and what actually is the scene. The Democrats, in my view, and please slap me down if I'm wrong, are more reactionary than the Republican Party. And that is not only historically, but now. They are warmongers. They want to wage a war against everybody who doesn't go along with it. They cannot explain why they lost the election. They don't do anything for ordinary people. They don't do anything abroad. They are more Zionists than the Zionists or the Republicans on the question of Israel-Palestine. They are never able to condemn the atrocities committed by the Zionist state. They always say Israel has the right to defend itself. Don't the Palestinians have the right to live in a land where their forefathers have lived for over 1,000 years, of which they have been deprived at gunpoint, and they live in refugee camps? Would ordinary humanity not actually impel you to support them? And especially for people who are constantly talking of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. What are they doing? They are in favor of oppression of the Palestinians. They did the same. They destroyed Libya, one of the finest African states with the highest standard of living in Africa. You may not like Colonel Gaddafi's style. I may not like, but that's neither here nor there. What he did for his own people was absolutely fantastic. And they destroyed it, and Libya now has become a concentration camp for refugees coming from somewhere else and being simply processed to Europe. And it's ruled by gunmen. And for the first time in 50, 60 years, slavery has come back to Libya because Colonel Gaddafi had a policy of treating Black Africans equally along with Arabs and whatnot. And some of the really right-wing Libyans hated him for that. He was no doubt a practicing Muslim, but he was not a fundamentalist. So the fundamentalists hated him. He brought women into the army. He brought women into work in offices. You know, it was the first African country to bring women into the army. So they don't like anything progressive. They don't like anything democratic. They don't like any uplift in the lives of people. So all these people who are treated like that are huddling together, and hence the success of organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the the BRICS organization. And you were right in your opening remarks. American imperialism is the sergeant for recruiting these countries into these organizations. You know, they are not simply coming because they've thought out a plan of how to organize separately from America. They've been forced to do that because that's the only way for them to survive. And they're beginning not only to survive, but do rather well.
You know, you could speak to this far better than I. I'm running some things by you that I've been thinking for a while. When this conflict started and I started noticing the dynamics, I realized that the U.S. had miscalculated, thinking that U.S. imperialism was so intimidating that the global South countries, the African countries, Latino countries, etc., India would simply bow to their orders and would join them in a gigantic, economic bloc against Russia. And very quickly afterwards, I started commenting that the scab of colonialism had been pulled off, and that the colonial countries were feeling that blood again, and that a big part of why countries, even small countries that are, could not even hope to stand up to US imperialism, are risking it all to join the coalition, the Eurasian-led coalition. Part of this was historical, their opportunity to push back against the colonial powers of Europe and U.S. imperialism, being from a country that suffered from colonialism, imperialism, etc. What do you think about how the history of these things and the oppression, the genocides, etc., are affecting these countries and how they're approaching the conflict today?
I'm sad to have to say that this consciousness is far less in India than in countries like China. Every Chinese knows, a student in a junior school knows what the Japanese and imperialists did to China and what the century of humiliation was. Indian students are not told the humiliation that was heaped upon Indian people during 190 years of British rule over India. But all the same, the Indian ruling class is able to calculate. It knows how to actually make a living. India has a very strong historical relationship, first with the Soviet Union and then with Russia. Russia and the Soviet Union provided big market for Indian industry. Indian industry would not even be on its feet without the help of the Soviet Union. When India became independent, it wasn't even producing a toothbrush or a pencil. It had to import everything. When I was a little boy in my house, there was cutlery with writings in Urdu saying such and such cutlery works Sheffield. We couldn't even produce knives and forks. But when it was realized early by the independent government of Nehru that in order to build industry, they needed some sort of planning, and they also needed steel industry, and they wanted to build a steel plant. Neither America nor Germany nor Britain would help. And who comes to their help? The Soviet Union. Once the Soviet Union came, each one of them then built a large steel plant in India, because there was competition, and they didn't want to be completely excluded from India. And secondly, India has always bought large amounts of armament from first the Soviet Union and now Russia. Although India has diversified somewhat now, all the same 50% of the armaments used by the Indian Army, Air Force, and Navy are produced in Russia, and they have strong relationship. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov does not come and give them lectures how they should do. But of course, when voting took place in the United Nations General Assembly on the question of Russia's special military operation, America wanted to corral every country into condemning Russia. There were over 100 countries that condemned Russia, but these are small countries. If you look at countries that voted against it, and I have to admire even countries like Eritrea that had the actually audacity to vote against that resolution, Syria, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and of course various. And if you take the countries that didn't vote either way, abstentions, India, China, etc., the majority of the world's population did not condemn Russia, and that, of course, was a shock to the Americans because they actually believed in themselves. They think the Soviet Union came down because of them. It didn't come down because of Russia. Soviet Union was destroyed internally by the wrong policy that after the death of Stalin had been followed for decades by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, i.e. bringing market reforms and encroachment of the Soviet economy by markets, till Gorbachev comes along. Half the economy is already being run by the black marketeers. He said, we want market socialism. And within 2 years, the Soviet Union was gone. It wasn't America that destroyed the Soviet Union. If Soviet Union could be destroyed by imperialism, it would have been destroyed in the Second World War. Germany was the most powerful imperialist country, militarily armed to the teeth. And the country that made the biggest contribution to the defeat of Nazi Germany was the Soviet Union. For 3 whole years on the Eastern Front, the Nazi armies were fighting with 270 divisions against the Soviet Union. And America and Britain refused to open a second front because their purpose was A, to weaken Germany, and B, to weaken the Soviet Union. Germany because it was a rival imperialist power, and the Soviet Union because it was socialist and communist. It didn't work out like that. So Soviet Union was very powerful. It had been built on the basis of fraternal solidarity among its peoples. You could be Muslim, you could be Christian, you could be atheist, you could be Kazakh, you could be Chechen, you could be anybody else. And they were united as one in fighting during the Second World War. And people, millions of people, 27 million people gave their lives. And millions of people went to the battle with the slogan, for the motherland and for Comrade Stalin. He was very, very popular. He was the leader of the Soviet Union. You know better than me. He was extremely popular, whatever the horror stories that you hear in the Western countries. So the Indian bourgeoisie cannot easily be made to fight against Russia anymore. As far as the McMahon line is concerned, the Chinese have always said, we want to sit down and actually settle this issue. But of course, the opposition created such a hoo-ha. Nehru was bamboozled by it and encouraged by the United States of America at a time when the relations between China and the Soviet Union were not very good. So Nehru thought China will just be a pushover. China also had 3 very bad years of drought and floods in a lethal combination. So Indians thought the Chinese would be pushed over. Within 2 weeks, the Indian armies were absolutely flattened. And, you know, there are historical issues between India and China. The old boundaries can simply not be put together. There is a large areas of India which were part of China at one time. One is the province of Arunachal Pradesh. Large parts of Ladakh were Chinese territory. Now, if the Chinese insisted on straightening that out, you'll never end this fight. So there's got to be a compromise. India then acted very provocatively, hosting the Dalai Lama. What has India to gain from hosting the Dalai Lama? And what had Dalai Lama to offer? They were a theocracy that oppressed the peasantry, that treated their own people extremely badly. In fact, for the first time, the Tibetan people have got a higher standard of living and liberty than they did under the slave owning system. So I'm sure that Indians will come to an agreement with China, whatever the problems on the way. At the moment, you wouldn't believe that, Garland. The trade between India and China is at a far higher level than it has ever been. is nearly $200 billion a year, just like the trade between Russia and China is nearly $200 billion. Every country is wanting to trade with Russia, and every country wants to trade with China. There are not many other countries you can trade with on the basis of a relative equality. They don't impose on you. They don't say, if you trade with America, we won't trade with you. Well, the Americans do that. And the Western countries are stupidly following that line, and it would not succeed. And all the attempts to actually enlist the help of India against China, in my view, and it may turn out to be wrong, my estimate is it will not work. Indians will not. And Americans will start denouncing the Indians, and that will seal the pact between India and China. The best way for it to happen is that the Americans should actually accuse Indians of all sorts of things. That will teach them a lesson.
Yes, one of the things that I've been saying for a while is India aspires to be a great world power, and it's growing. It has the potential there, and that I think that the leaders of India understand that the U.S. is going after Russia and China because they're growing and becoming world powers, and they have an aspiration to become a more of a world power than they are now. I would call India more of a regional power and a growing world power. But I think they understand that if the United States were to be successful in dispatching with Russia and China, which is certainly not going to happen, but let's just say their evil plan was to go forward. Okay, we've absorbed Russia, we've put China out of business and taken all their industry, that the evil eyes of imperialism would come around and the crosshairs would be right on India, that India would have to be, as far as I'm concerned, from the neocons, the next target. And India, of course, South Africa, Brazil, the regional powers, Saudi Arabia, but at the top of the list, I think, would be India. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. There are just 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, the desire to be a world power is a lunatic idea. You make your progress, you develop your economy, you look after your own people. There's no need for any country to be a world power and being ahead of others. That era, in my view, is gone. It's a colonialist idea. It's not an idea that we should cherish anyway. And secondly, you're quite right. Once they've finished with one, they move over to the next target. Their philosophy is exactly the same as of a 19th century bellicose imperialist who said, Britain has no permanent friends. It has only permanent interests. That is the philosophy of imperialism. It has no friends. There's nobody friend. After the Second World War, one of the things that America did was absolutely to do everything possible to reduce the power of Great Britain, because it could not take its place without actually bringing Britain to its knees. And they actually did that. Part of the reason that British Empire disintegrated was also that America was working to disintegrate the European empires in the Middle East, because without displacing them, it could not become the power that it eventually was to become, certainly from the time of the Suez crisis, if not earlier. That is what it was doing. And the British knew it, but they could do nothing because they become indebted to America during the Second World War. They needed more money to recover from the after effects of war. And that's how America was able to buy all the European bourgeoisie. If you read the last speech that Stalin made at the 19th Party Congress a few months before he died, and he didn't speak. He didn't normally used to deliver long speeches. He spoke for 10 minutes, only to thank the foreign delegates who had come to attend the 19th Party Congress. And one of the points he makes is that in the olden days, the bourgeoisie of Western Europe, prided itself by being nationalist and upholding national interest. It's given up that for a few $million. Since the bourgeoisie won't do it, you, the representatives of the proletariat, must hold aloft the banner of independence. And that's what we are trying to work over here, not with a view to overpowering others, but actually to have our country follow an independent foreign and domestic policy. Let our economy work for the benefit of our people rather than that there's not a single war that America wages that Britain is not enlisted into. From the war in Korea to the war in Syria to the war in Vietnam. Vietnam, it didn't send soldiers, but it gave, it was complicit in that war, but it avoided sending soldiers to Vietnam. It sent to every possible conflict. Britain is ever ready because its oil and financial interests are intertwined with the Wall Street and the American big oil companies. So in order to maintain its position, it has to act as a junior partner to US imperialism. So it's a criminal government. It does everything that is required of it. It talks of human rights, democracy, and rule of law, but it acts quite fascistically everywhere abroad, and it represses the people at home. We are getting law after law in this country with a view to suppressing even ordinary dissent, people coming into to demonstrations, etc. They're constantly being attacked, as indeed they are in the United States of America, the home of the brave and the free, as they call it.
South Africa. I know recently there's been dust up with U.S. imperialism here recently. The South Africans have been pretty outspoken when it comes to their support of the Eurasian coalition. I like to use that term, but their support of Russia in the military and the special military operation. I do know historically there's been a very strong communist party, a strong left in South Africa that still has significant input and strength in the government. If you could talk about South Africa and how they fit into this puzzle.
Well, they fit into this puzzle because when the South Africans who had been subjected to colonialism and racial repression for over 3 centuries, when they were fighting for their liberation, all the imperialist countries supported the apartheid regime in South Africa, supplied it with weaponry, supplied it with diplomatic protection, supplied it with financial aid in order to repress the black population. When Mandela was in jail, he's now been turned into a saint and an icon. He was described as a terrorist unfailingly by Nixon, by Margaret Thatcher, by the British government, British prime ministers. Everyone called him a terrorist. And after long struggle, after 27 years in prison, when he went on a tour, he went to 2 countries first, Libya, and secondly, to Cuba. And Clinton objected and complained that he was visiting these countries. He said, we are visiting those countries who gave us support when we were struggling for our independence, while others who are now asking us not to have anything to do with them were calling us terrorists. So he went, embraced Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, Fidel Castro. So he was a brave man. He did that. I'm not sure that all his followers are equally brave, but all the same, they understand their history. And South Africa cannot carry on without having connections with Russia, with India, with China. And they have very good relations with all these countries. And I think it's a very wise policy that they do. South African votes at the United Nations should not be available for sale. They should be determined independently by South Africa what's in their own national interest and what is in the interest of humanity at large. And the South Africans have annoyed Americans for that. They're unbelievably stupid as well. What is the point of getting this kangaroo code called the International Criminal Code to issue an arrest warrant for the arrest of Vladimir Putin? Who is going to arrest Vladimir Putin? They couldn't even arrest Bashir from Sudan when he went to South Africa, although he'd been charged by the same kangaroo code with crimes against, I don't know, God knows, God, against God and humanity and whatever you can think of. And if Putin was to go to South Africa, you think the South African government is going to arrest him? Of course, it's not going to arrest. It's wishful thinking. So they burn their boats, and when they lose, and it's not a question of if, when they lose in their proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, they're having to mend fences with Russia, and all the egregious outrages they've committed against Russia would have to be swallowed by them, and all the journalists coterie would start writing in a completely different vein. You know, they're very good at that. Overnight, their narrative changes. Like they forget their past. They expect their audiences not to have a memory of more than 24 hours. So they'll forget what they've been doing. You know, it these days looks like they were always supporters of South African liberation. They were not. They wanted South African gold, they wanted South African uranium, they wanted South African agricultural products, they wanted South African cheap labor. That's what they were after. There's nobody they love. They love money and they love loot. And that's what they were after. And increasing number of people all over the world are beginning to understand that.
Emmanuel Macron has mentioned, European autonomy recently. Now, my interpretation of that was he didn't say French autonomy. He didn't say Italian. He didn't say that countries in Europe should have their own sovereignty and independence. He mentioned Europe as though it was, the United States of Europe, the EU. I always believe that Emmanuel Macron speaks for the ruling class and no one else. So your thoughts on this discussion, let me say this. Here's the way I kind of interpreted it. There is an element, a faction of the ruling class in Europe who recognizes that U.S. imperialism is not working out. They're still imperialist and colonialist at heart. So they're looking at a new multipolar world, and they say this multipolar world is forming. Clearly, the U.S. is going to be one of the poles. It will always be powerful for a number of reasons. It looks like there'll be a Eurasian pole of, an India, Russia, China, whatever, and that what Macron and his ilk are seeing is we'd like to separate Europe. That there's a faction of the ruling class, ruling elite in Europe that want to separate Europe from U.S. imperialism and have their own imperialist bloc so they can continue their miscreant activities worldwide, but more separately from the United States. I think they're looking at the Biden administration, they're looking at the neocons, and they're saying, these people are fools. They're really, really stupid. We're not stupid imperialists. We could do it better. At any rate, your thoughts on my evaluation of that?
No, I completely agree with you on that evaluation. The only exception I would make is the British ruling class. It is absolutely committed to serving in a most servile fashion U.S. imperialism, not because it's stupid, because its interests are better safeguarded acting as a junior partner to U.S. imperialism. But the interests of the other imperialist powers in Europe, Germany, France, etc., are not served by being servile to America. So the question is, how do they get out of that, those clutches? At the moment, the tangle is going on. America wants these countries to actually disconnect themselves from China. Now, if they did, to quote somebody else, it would be the strongest suicide note that I've ever seen in my life. If they disconnect, China provides them with market, with avenues for investment, with up to now cheap labor. Germany makes more than half its profits of automotive industry in China than in the rest of the world. And even American companies like Apple's Tim Cook has made it perfectly clear, whatever the administration says, Apple is not going to pull out of China. You're in business to make money. You're not there for altruistic purposes. You're not a charitable person. If you're making so much money in China, you're not going to try and engage from China. short of a nuclear exchange between China and America, or China and Russia, or the combination of these three, there is going to be no disconnect in my view. And then they say they will diversify, take their industry somewhere else. But the problem with diversification is no other country has the infrastructure for providing facilities to industry, from transport to factories to ports to ships and everything. And of course, the industrial capacity as China has. So they're stuck there, and they will not disconnect themselves. And they've already done themselves a lot of harm by applying sanctions against Russia. And they will have to retreat from those sanctions. That would come when they're defeated in Ukraine. How are they going to deal with Russia? Russia is too vast. It's too big. It's not some small, very little enclave. It's not Zanzibar, a little island, of people not having the same power financially or militarily that they can subdue. Russia is a very powerful country. The European imperialist countries, Western European imperialist countries, have persuaded themselves that Russia's economy is no bigger than Holland's. But that's nonsense, because, we count economy on the basis of gross domestic product. Every money you spend is counted as part of the GDP. Somebody goes gambling, that's part of GDP. Somebody goes to a brothel, that's counted as GDP. So somebody goes 15 times a week to a brothel, he's obviously contributing greatly to the GDP growth. That's the way we count. But the real economy is having factories, having the things that people need, making those things for the people. If you consider from that point of view, Russia is not a small economy. Russia is a very big economy. And this war, more than anything else, has revealed that Russia is a big economy. It's producing what its armed forces need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year. And they will outlast their opponents. They'll wear them out. They'll beat them in the battlefield. And that is a lesson that they need to be taught.
Last question I'll ask you. We see what China has done, the immense growth that China has been able to accomplish in such a short period of time. India is growing in education and population, et cetera. Does India have the potential to grow like China?
Yes, it has the potential to grow like China, but it'll have to, do lot more to improve its infrastructure, to improve its in industrial and commercial policy. One of the things India could do very much to actually improve the chance of its growth is to have very good relations with China. It makes no sense for us to rely on trade with America and Europe when we can trade next door. You just take 2 steps, you cross the border and you trade with the Chinese trade with you. And they in fact are trading with India. And India has got to get into that mode. It should trade more with Russia, more with China. It's already doing so increasingly. So there's no shortage of talent in India. But talent alone cannot do the job. There has to be a lot of investment in industry, particularly heavy industry, and particularly within heavy industry, machine building industry. These are the basis of that. And of course, other countries are prepared to invest in India. China is prepared to invest in India. Russia is prepared to invest in India. And of course, even European countries want to invest in India. And people cannot be held back anymore from development. In my view, America was developed by British capital. And once the British realized what America was becoming powerful, they tried to actually thwart the development of America. They failed miserably. Equally, the attempts now to thwart the development of China will fail miserably. And while they're conducting these economic wars against China and Russia, then I'm sure some Western countries want to invest more in India, and that would help the development of India. And eventually the Indians will become too big for their boots as well, and they'll have to be tackled. So it's a perennial problem that imperialism faces. The sooner it has dealt with one, three other problems crop up. It's like a fire engine in a town. The fires are breaking out everywhere, and it's rushing from one outbreak of fire to another to quench it, and not being very successful. Technology is one of those things, Garland. It cannot become the property and monopoly of just one people. You go to Africa, younger generation are very savvy with technology. They understand the internet. They're able to do all those things. So all they need is an opportunity. And once the opportunity comes, I mean, Stalin used to say that even the most backward people can master technology given the opportunity. And I say always to my comrades, I think he hadn't seen me, because if he'd seen me, then I cannot master technology. But the fact of the matter is, given the opportunity, I mean, Paul Robeson went to the Soviet Union and came back. He said, and he went to Africa as well. And the British were saying Africa could not be self-governing for 1,000 years. He said these people in the backward areas of the former Tsarist Empire have become masters of their own fate within 10 years. And the same will happen to Africa and everywhere else. Given the opportunity, people will rise up against oppression and build economies that help their own people. But it's a long process, because within each country, there are compradors who make money. People are available to be bought. India was not captured by the British for the British. India was captured for the British by the Indians. It's the Indian army that fought, because Britain had its bourgeois revolution. If an order was given to somebody, everyone obeyed that. But in India, because of the feudal disintegration, that was not the case. And the British were able to use the contradictions within Indian society and able to conquer one area after another. But things are changing. People are no longer prepared to be manipulated. Although in each country, there are people who make money by having dealings with America. And to them, America is the Mecca. But the majority of people don't think that way. They have a different idea as to how India should develop.
Harpal Brar is a political publicist who you're still residing in jolly old England, I take it, correct?
Jolly old England.
Yes.
And the only thing I'd like to mention is, Garland, I wrote this book a few years ago. It's called Inqilab Zindabad, which translates as Long Live the Revolution. It's about the Indian liberation struggle. It's not a history of India, but it actually deals with landmark movements that led to the freedom of India from Britain. So I thought I'd just give it a plug.
Absolutely. What's that? Hold it up in front of the camera there. Did you have the book there? That's it. And it's called
Inqilab Zindabad.
Okay.
Inqilab is the Indian word for revolution. Zindabad is long live. Long
live the revolution. Viva la revolución. Thank you very much, Harpal Brar. Certainly appreciate you coming on, and I hope to get you again. I hope to have you back on again sometime soon.
Thank you, and Garland, I'm very grateful to you. Will it be possible for us to get a copy of this?
Absolutely, I will send you a link.
Thank you so much. And
all right, thank you
once again. Thank you from me, and from all my comrades. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I've got to run. Harpal Brar, we had Jody Brar on in the past, and she was fantastic. I spoke with her. I know familiar with her father, and she was able to connect me with him. And India is an area I don't know much about, and it was great to bring a brilliant man on, an author, a longtime businessman, and to come on and to teach us some things we didn't know. So hopefully, I know I learned some things today. Hopefully everybody else did. Thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, follow me on Telegram. Follow me at Garland Nixon on Twitter. If you can afford to help the channel, there's patreon.com, PayPal, of course, buy me a coffee if you can do buy me a coffee. And you can also do just one time on buy me a coffee donations, or you can become a monthly donator just like Patreon. They have that. And of course, my Cash App information is there. Go to rockfin.com. That's my free speech platform. In case they toss me off of YouTube, you can find me at rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Look around Rockfin too. A lot of fantastic shows on Rockfin. Last but not least, if you can afford to sponsor my channel on Rockfin, it's you can become a subscriber on my Rockfin channel. You don't have to. It's free. You don't have to be a subscriber. If you can't afford it, don't worry about it. If you can afford it, it's $14.99 a month, or I think it's, if you join for a year, it's around $12.40 something a month, because they give you a couple months free. If you can afford that, that's great. If you can't, just become a member on my Rockfin channel. So if they toss me off of here, then you'll have Rockfin. Thanks a lot, everybody. Gotta run.